In just 39 seconds, one of Britain's most beloved acting legends completely lost his temper on live television, telling the host to shut her mouth before storming off the set in a fury that left the entire studio in shocked silence. What started as a simple conversation about his legendary career turned into an absolute car crash of an interview, with accusations flying, voices raised, and a dramatic walk-off that nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this explosive story, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Britain's darkest scandals, the confrontations the celebrities don't want you to see, and the moments that get swept under the rug. Hit that subscribe button now, because you won't want to miss what we've got coming. Last night on Lorraine Kelly's morning show, what should have been a celebration of Michael Caine's incredible career turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments in British television history. The legendary actor, known for his iconic roles in films like The Italian Job and The Dark Knight, sat down expecting a respectful conversation about his decades in the industry. What he got instead was something completely different. The interview started normally enough. Michael Caine walked onto the set to warm applause from the studio audience, looking sharp in a dark suit and tie. He settled into the bright orange sofa across from Lorraine Kelly, who was beaming with her usual cheerful energy. The first few minutes passed without incident as they exchanged pleasantries about the weather and his journey to the studio. "So, Michael, it's absolutely wonderful to have you here," Lorraine began, leaning forward with her hands clasped together. "You've had such an incredible career, spanning what, over 60 years now?" "That's right, love," Michael replied with his distinctive Cockney accent, smiling politely. "Been at it since the 1950 seconds. Time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it?" "It certainly does," Lorraine continued, her voice taking on that overly enthusiastic tone she's known for. "Now, I have to ask you about some of your most famous roles. The Italian Job, of course, is an absolute classic. That scene with the Mini Coopers, iconic stuff." Michael nodded appreciatively. "Yeah, that was a special film. We had a lot of fun making that one. Cold as hell up in those Italian mountains, though, I'll tell you that much." But then Lorraine's questioning took a turn. Her smile became a bit more fixed, a bit less genuine. "You know, Michael, there's been quite a bit of discussion lately about some of your older interviews, comments you made years ago about various topics. How do you feel about those resurfacing in today's climate?" Michael's expression shifted slightly. His easy smile faded just a touch, replaced by something more guarded. "Well, Lorraine, I think context matters, doesn't it? I've always spoken my mind, and I've never pretended to be anyone I'm not. That's all I can say about that." Lorraine wasn't letting it go, though. She leaned in closer, her eyes brightening with the scent of controversy. "But surely you can see how some of those comments might not land well today. Times have changed quite a bit since the 60s and 70s. "Times have changed, yes," Michael agreed, his voice taking on a slight edge. "But I haven't changed who I am. I'm not going to apologize for speaking honestly in interviews I gave decades ago. I was a different person then. The world was a different place." "Right, but accountability is important, isn't it?" Lorraine pressed, and you could see Michael's jaw tighten just a fraction. "Don't you think public figures have a responsibility to address their past statements?" Michael shifted in his seat, clearly becoming uncomfortable with where this was heading. "Listen, I came here to talk about my work, about the craft of acting. I didn't come here to be put on trial for things I said 40 years ago." But Lorraine wasn't backing down. In fact, she seemed energized by his discomfort. "I'm just asking the questions that our viewers want answered, Michael. Surely you can understand that." "What I understand," Michael said, his voice dropping to a lower register, "is that you invited me here under the pretense of a friendly chat, and now you're trying to ambush me with this nonsense." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. The camera crew exchanged glances. The studio audience, which had been clapping enthusiastically just minutes before, sat in uncomfortable silence. This was not going the way anyone had expected. Lorraine's smile remained plastered on her face, but there was something cold behind it now. "It's not an ambush, Michael. It's called journalism. It's called holding people accountable for their words and actions." "Journalism?" Michael let out a short, bitter laugh. "This isn't journalism, love. This is a morning chat show where you usually talk about recipes and celebrity gossip. Don't flatter yourself." That comment landed like a slap. Lorraine's smile finally cracked, just for a moment, before she composed herself. "Well, that's a bit unfair, isn't it? I've been doing this for over 30 years. And in those 30 years, Michael shot back, have you learned the difference between asking tough questions and just being rude for the sake of it?" The atmosphere in the studio had completely transformed. What had started as mild discomfort was now turning into something much more serious. Lorraine sat up straighter, her professional mask slipping further. "I'm not being rude, Michael. I'm doing my job. If you can't handle a few difficult questions, perhaps you shouldn't have agreed to come on the show." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Difficult questions? You're not asking difficult questions. You're digging through my past looking for anything you can twist into a scandal. There's a difference." "I'm not twisting anything," Lorraine insisted, her voice rising slightly. "I'm simply asking you to reflect on things you've actually said. If you're uncomfortable with that, maybe you should reflect on why." "Maybe I'm uncomfortable," Michael said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, "because I'm sitting here being lectured by someone who's built a career on kissing up to celebrities and peddling lightweight entertainment. And now suddenly you want to play hard-hitting journalist?" The studio went completely silent. Someone in the crew dropped something, and the clatter echoed through the space. Lorraine's face had gone pale, then red. "That's completely uncalled for," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've interviewed prime ministers. I've covered serious news stories." "Oh, come off it," Michael interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "You run a morning fluff show. Nothing wrong with that, but don't pretend you're Jeremy Paxman. You're not." Lorraine's composure was crumbling by the second. You could see the anger flashing in her eyes, the way her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "You know what, Michael? This attitude of yours, this arrogance, this is exactly what people have been talking about. You think you're above criticism because you're a legend, because you've been in a few good films." "A few good films?" Michael repeated incredulously. "A few good films? I've got more awards and accolades than you've had hot dinners, sweetheart, and I earned every single one of them through hard work and talent, not by smiling at a camera and reading off a teleprompter." The insult hit its mark. Lorraine's professional facade completely shattered. "How dare you? How dare you come on my show and disrespect me like this? I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am. I've earned my place in this industry." "By doing what exactly?" Michael challenged, leaning forward now, his voice dripping with disdain. "By asking softball questions and giggling at celebrities' jokes. By pretending every guest is your best friend. That's not journalism, that's sycophancy. At least I treat people with respect," Lorraine shouted, her voice echoing through the studio. The audience gasped. This was live television, and it was going completely off the rails. "At least I don't waltz around thinking I'm better than everyone else. At least I don't look down my nose at people who've worked just as hard as I have." Michael stood up from the sofa, his face thunderous. "Respect? You call this respect? You invite me here. You start picking at my past like a vulture, and then you act offended when I call you out on it? You're a hypocrite, Lorraine. A complete hypocrite." "Sit down," Lorraine demanded, also standing now. The two of them were facing each other across the coffee table, both visibly furious. "You don't get to come on my show, insult me, insult my work, and then act like you're the victim here." "I'm not acting like anything," Michael roared back. "I'm telling you exactly what I think. You wanted honesty? Well, here it is. You're a mediocre presenter running a mediocre show, trying to create drama where there isn't any, because you think it'll get you ratings." "Get out!" Lorraine screamed, pointing toward the exit. Her face was scarlet, her chest heaving with anger. "Get out of my studio right now. I don't have to stand here and take this from you." "Oh, don't worry," Michael said, his voice dangerously quiet now. "I'm leaving. I wouldn't stay here another second if you paid me. This whole thing has been a bloody joke from start to finish." "You're the joke," Lorraine shot back, completely losing control now. "You're a relic, Michael. A dinosaur who can't handle being questioned. The industry has moved on, and you can't stand it." Michael shook his head, a disgusted expression on his face. "The industry hasn't moved on, love. It's just been taken over by people like you." People who care more about creating controversy than actually having something meaningful to say. At least I'm still relevant, Lorraine shouted. At least people still want to hear what I have to say. When was the last time you were in a film that anyone cared about? That was a bridge too far. Michael's face went from angry to absolutely livid. You want to talk about relevance? Let's talk about relevance. In 50 years, nobody's going to remember Lorraine Kelly. Nobody's going to talk about your contribution to television or film. You're a footnote, a morning show host who faded into obscurity. But they'll still be watching my films. They'll still be studying my performances. That's the difference between us. Oh, piss off, Lorraine shrieked, completely abandoning any pretense of professionalism. Just piss off out of here. You arrogant, pompous, self-important bastard. Get out. The crew was frozen, unsure whether to cut the cameras or keep filming this absolute train wreck. The producers in the control room were probably having heart attacks. This was unprecedented. Michael started walking toward the exit, but he turned back one more time. You know what your problem is, Lorraine? You're so desperate to be taken seriously that you'll tear down people who actually have accomplished something. You're not a journalist. You're not even a decent presenter. You're just someone who lucked into a job and has been coasting ever since. I said get out, Lorraine screamed, her voice cracking. Security! Someone get this man out of my studio. I'm going, Michael said, holding up his hands. But let me tell you something before I do. This interview? This whole disaster? It's not going to make you look like the hero you think it will. People are going to watch this, and they're going to see you for exactly what you are. A bully, a hack, and a terrible host. You think I care what people think? Lorraine yelled back, tears of rage now visible in her eyes. You think I care about your opinion? You're nothing to me, nothing. And you're nothing to the rest of us, Michael replied coldly. That's why you have to resort to this kind of ambush television. Because if you actually had talent, if you actually had something to offer, you wouldn't need to manufacture drama to keep people watching. Lorraine picked up her coffee mug from the table, and for a moment, it looked like she might actually throw it at him. The entire studio held its breath, but she set it down hard, coffee sloshing over the sides, and pointed at the door again. Out, now, before I have you physically removed. Michael laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. You're really quite something, you know that? I've done thousands of interviews in my career. Thousands. And I can honestly say, this has been the worst one. Not because of the questions, but because of you, your attitude, your ego, your complete lack of professionalism. My lack of professionalism? Lorraine sputtered. My lack of professionalism? You've done nothing but insult me for the past 10 minutes. Because you deserved it, Michael shot back. You started this, Lorraine. You came at me with these loaded questions, this holier-than-thou attitude, and then you got upset when I pushed back. What did you expect? That I'd just sit here and take it? I expected you to behave like an adult, Lorraine screamed. I expected you to have a conversation like a professional. But clearly, that's too much to ask. From someone who's so far up their own arse they can't see daylight. Better up my own arse than up everyone else's. Which is where you spend most of your time, Michael retorted. All those years of sucking up to celebrities, and the one time someone doesn't play along, you fall apart. Says a lot about you, doesn't it? Get out! Get out! Get out! Lorraine was practically hyperventilating now, her face purple with rage. I'm done with you. We're done. This interview is over. It was over the moment it started, Michael said, straightening his tie. Should have known better than to come on this third-rate show in the first place. My mistake. Won't be making it again. He turned on his heel and started walking toward the exit. Behind him, Lorraine was still shouting, her words tumbling over each other in a stream of fury. Don't you dare walk away from me. Don't you dare. You think you can just insult me on my own show and walk away? You think you're untouchable? You're not. You're just an old man living in the past. Michael paused at the edge of the set, just before disappearing backstage. He looked back one final time, and his expression was one of pure contempt. And you're just a bitter presenter who never made it beyond morning television. At least I have a past worth living in. What do you have? This? He gestured around the studio. This circus? Congratulations, Lorraine. You must be so proud. With that, he vanished through the studio door. The sound of it slamming echoed through the space like a gunshot. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The camera stayed trained on Lorraine, who was standing there shaking, tears streaming down her face now, her makeup running. We're going to take a break," she managed to choke out, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll be right back after these messages." But the cameras kept rolling for a few seconds longer, capturing Lorraine collapsing back onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. One of the crew members rushed over to her, putting a hand on her shoulder. The audio picked up her sobbing. Though whether it was from anger or humiliation or both was impossible to tell. The studio audience sat in stunned silence. Some of them looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others looked almost gleeful, excited to have witnessed such drama firsthand. A few were already pulling out their phones, no doubt preparing to share what they'd just seen on social media. Backstage, staff members were frantically trying to figure out what to do. Should they cut to commercial? Should they try to salvage the show? Should they just end it early? Nobody seemed to know. This kind of thing didn't happen. Morning shows were supposed to be safe, comfortable, predictable. This was anything but. In the dressing room, Michael Caine was already packing up his things. His security detail and manager were hovering nearby, both looking stressed and uncertain. The manager was on his phone, probably already dealing with calls from publicists and agents and lawyers. "That was a bloody disaster," the manager said, running a hand through his hair. "Michael, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking," Michael said calmly, folding his jacket over his arm, "that I'm too old and too accomplished to sit there and be lectured by someone half my talent. She wanted a fight. She got a fight. Simple as that. The press is going to have a field day with this," the manager continued. "You know that, right? This is going to be everywhere by this afternoon." Michael shrugged, completely unbothered. "Let them. I spoke my mind. I'm not apologizing for that. She crossed a line, and I called her out on it. If people want to make me the villain in this story, that's their problem, not mine." Back on the set, Lorraine had somewhat composed herself. Her makeup artist was frantically trying to repair the damage, dabbing at the mascara streaks on her cheeks. A producer was crouched next to her, speaking in low, urgent tones, probably trying to figure out how to proceed. "We can't just pretend that didn't happen," the producer was saying. "We have to address it. Should we release a statement? Should you say something when we come back on air?" Lorraine shook her head violently. "I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to address it. Just get me through the rest of the show. Please." But getting through the rest of the show was going to be nearly impossible. The atmosphere in the studio was toxic. The crew was distracted. The audience was buzzing with whispered conversations. And Lorraine herself looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. When the show came back from commercial break, Lorraine did her best to continue as if nothing had happened. She introduced the next segment with a shaky voice, smiled at the camera with a forced brightness, and tried to move on. But everyone watching could tell something was deeply wrong. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her notes. Her voice wavered. Her eyes were red and puffy, despite the makeup artist's best efforts. The remaining guests on the show looked uncomfortable, shooting glances at each other. A chef who was supposed to demonstrate a recipe seemed unsure whether to proceed with his usual cheerful banter or to tone it down. He opted for the latter, getting through his segment as quickly and quietly as possible before escaping backstage. Throughout the rest of the broadcast, you could feel the tension. Every time Lorraine smiled, it looked painted on. Every time she laughed, it sounded hollow. The show that usually radiated warmth and comfort now felt awkward and strained. Meanwhile, in the car taking him away from the studio, Michael Caine sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the passing London streets. His phone was already blowing up with messages and calls, but he ignored them all. He knew what was coming. He knew this would be the talk of the industry for days, maybe weeks. But sitting there, replaying the confrontation in his mind, he didn't feel regret. He felt vindicated. He'd spent decades in this business, dealt with countless interviews, and he'd never been one to suffer fools gladly. Lorraine Kelly had pushed him, had tried to use him for ratings and controversy, and he'd pushed back harder. Would there be consequences? Probably. Would some people think he'd been too harsh? Almost certainly. But Michael Caine had built his career on being authentic, on not pretending to be someone he wasn't. And he wasn't about to start pretending now. Not for Lorraine Kelly. Not for anyone. The car pulled away from the studio complex, leaving behind the chaos and confusion. Inside, the production team was already in damage control mode. The executives were screaming at each other, and Lorraine Kelly was trying to hold herself together long enough to finish the broadcast. But Michael Caine was done. He'd said his piece, made his stand, and walked away. That was all there was to it.